Hello there. Welcome back to Shadow House The Gathering. I looked a little bit ahead and it seems that the chapters are pretty short, so I'm actually going to read chapters 2, 3, and 4 today. Again, if you would like to reach out to me, if you have a question, please don't hesitate to email me. All right, let's get started. Chapter 2. Marcus Geller heard music that no one else seemed to notice, music emanating from inside a nearby room that only he was aware of. There was no way to fight this music, no way to ignore it. So whenever he could, Marcus tried to play along. Marcus had just sat down on the stool in the corner of the dining room, hugging the cello between his knees and raising the bow, when his mother called out to him, "Marcus, would you come up here, please?" Her voice sounded thin and far away, and he knew that she'd parked herself at her computer in her bedroom upstairs, her usual spot for hiding from the real world. Marcus felt a knobby object rise up in his esophagus. He hadn't even begun practicing yet today, and already his mom was preparing to stop him. He squeezed his hands into fists and then released them slowly before answering, "Can you give me a minute?" Then he drove the bow across the strings, filling the room with a deep, resonant hum that drowned out all of his worries, as well as his mother's reply. Practicing at home had always been difficult. Finding privacy when you have 3 older siblings living under the same roof is akin to discovering a unicorn sleeping under your bed. But recently, the problem had been even more complicated. Marcus's music seemed to be affecting his mother in an unusual way. His mother's younger brother, Shane, had also played the cello. According to everyone in the family, he'd been really, really good at it. He'd had a bright future as a musician. But then, something horrible had happened. Marcus didn't know the details of Shane's death. Nobody talked about that part of the story. All he knew was that Shane had been 12 years old when he died, the same age as Marcus was now. Maybe it was because of the age thing, or maybe it was because Marcus was getting good at the cello. Whatever the case, it was freaking his mother out, and she was taking it out on him, which wasn't fair. It wasn't like Marcus could stop playing. If he did, he'd be overwhelmed by all the music that no one else seemed to hear. To Marcus, the sounds of the strings and the brass and the reeds were so bright and vibrant, the rhythm so wild and wicked, he couldn't believe that he was alone in his experience of it. And as a young child, he'd spoken incessantly about it, humming the melodies aloud so people would believe him. Eventually, his parents took him to see a doctor who suggested medication to stop the hallucinations. Afterward, Marcus realized that maybe the music should become a secret instead. He didn't want it to end, even if it was all in his head. This was around the time he'd finally begun to pick up whatever instrument was available from the music classroom at school and from his uncle's old collection at home to try to mimic the gorgeous melodies constantly floating around him. It was a perfect transition. Stop talking about the music and start making it. This change alleviated his parents' fear, but it also invited attention from teachers and other adults who were fascinated by Marcus's sudden talent. Though Marcus liked the attention, he wasn't sure he deserved it. Part of him felt like a fake. It wasn't as though he was inventing the compositions himself. They were coming to him from somewhere beyond this world. "Marcus." He jerked the bow away from the strings and then opened his eyes. His mother was standing in the dining room doorway, clutching a piece of paper. Marcus hadn't realized how lost he'd gotten in the music, nor how peaceful the afternoon had become. "Sorry, Mom," he said. "I was distracted." To his surprise, she smiled. "It's okay." She held out the piece of paper to him. "I just got this message. Figured it was easier to print it out and bring it down to you." "What is it?" "Read it and find out." "Dear Mrs. Geller, my name is L. Delphinium, and I am the director of the Larkspur Academy for the Performing Arts in New York State. I work with several professional scouts around the world, and when one of them attended your son's recent recital at the Oberlin campus in Ohio, she was overcome by the power of his performance. We would love it if Marcus came to study with us. At Larkspur, Marcus will have access to the most accomplished visiting faculty from New York City's best companies. We have attached a file that includes our brochure with additional information about our music program and what we stand for. We realize it is a little late in the season for an invitation such as this. However, it is our guiding principle that we seek out the most promising young talent, and we would be remiss if we did not at least try. With a student like Marcus, we would be willing to cover all tuition, board, and any travel expenses. It would cost you nothing. Please let us know at your earliest convenience. Best regards, L. Delphinium, Director, Larkspur Academy. Is this a joke? Marcus asked. I can't imagine so. It's insane. There was a scout at the Oberlin recital. You're a talented kid, Marcus, she said. Don't act so surprised. And you wouldn't mind if I went? I'd be delighted if you went. She folded her arms and grinned. She looked a little too delighted. Before he could answer, a blast of noise resounded in Marcus's ears, a cacophony filled with instruments, too many to name. This wasn't like any music he'd ever heard before. It was more like a scream. Marcus flinched and then, glancing at his mother, tried to disguise his shock as wide-eyed excitement. She didn't hear it at all. Chapter 3. In the dream that haunted her, Azumi Endo walked barefoot through the forest behind her aunt's home in Yamanashi Prefecture. The volcanic rock that had long ago spewed from the top of Mount Fuji made the ground there uneven and tricky beneath twisted tree roots and thick underbrush. Ignoring the clearly marked paths that crisscrossed the wilderness, Azumi often tripped, dropping to her knees, dirtying her nightgown before rising and continuing on. She knew that if she stopped even for a moment, she might feel a hand on her shoulder, and if she turned around, well, she didn't want to imagine what she'd find looming behind her. Tonight she pushed farther than she ever had before, to a ravine where a drop-off sliced through the terrain. In the shadows and fog, she couldn't make out the bottom. One step forward, and she would dive into a pit of sharp branches, a deadly trap rigged to ensnare her. She'd been following one of the long ribbons that had been tied to a trunk near the park's entrance, leading into the heart of the woods. That was where the bodies were hidden. In the dream, her skin was covered in a cool sheen of sweat, and her mind whirled, making her second guess what direction to take. She couldn't lower herself down. The drop was too dangerous. Besides, it didn't seem likely that Moriko was there. Wouldn't she have answered Azumi's call? Azumi suddenly couldn't remember if she'd ever even been shouting out to Moriko, but she knew that she must have been. Wasn't that why she was there? She was going to find her sister. She had to. Now, it was during moments like this when Azumi began to question how she came to be alone in the middle of the forest at all, that she understood she was dreaming again. The shadow world of these woods was all in her mind, or at least most of it was. There was another part of the dreaming, another part she never remembered until it was too late. Because whenever Azumi dreamed of the forest, she also walked in her sleep. Azumi opened her eyes to find herself surrounded by darkness, standing in the middle of the woods behind her family's house outside of Seattle for the third time that month. An ocean now separated her from the haunted forest in Japan, but her mind insisted on closing that distance, putting her right back in the place where she'd lost her sister. The mossy ground of Washington State was cold and wet against the soles of her feet, the summer air cool and humid. She could barely see in the darkness, uncertain whether the ravine had only been part of her dream, or if she was really a few steps from disaster. Not now, not again, she thought, crouching down to protect herself against the night. Mother and father will be terrified. How could she put them through this after what had happened to Moriko, after what Azumi herself had done? She had lost her sister. She couldn't lose herself. The morning after Azumi's latest nightmare, an idea came to her about how she could protect both her parents and herself. She had to accept that if she were to stay home, her dreaming would bring her deeper into danger, closer to a place from which she too would not return. On her computer, she searched for boarding schools on the east coast of the U.S., as far from the Pacific Ocean as she could get. Strangely, only a single website popped up. The Larkspur School. She tried the search again, and then again. She turned the computer off and then on, but the result was always the same. Larkspur. It must be some sort of sign, Azumi thought. Maybe this is supposed to be the one. She glanced over the school's mission statement. The Larkspur School has stood for over a century as a symbol of academic, artistic, and social excellence. Our pastoral campus is ideal for scholars who wish to shine. Azumi didn't need to read any more. This place sounded perfect. Chapter 4. One of the producers barged into the sunny room where Dash and Dylan Wright had been waiting for the day to begin. "We're going to need you downstairs in 15, said the bouncy brunette, whose name neither boy could remember. "Just a heads up, 'kay?" They'd been trying to stem the boredom of their final production schedule by flipping through different game apps on their phones. The Wright twins had been professional actors since the age of 5, so they were used to all sorts of people coming and going into their lives and dressing rooms on a daily basis. "Downstairs?" asked Dylan with a smirk. "For what? Are we shooting the next scene?" The producer raised an eyebrow and continued to look at Dash, as if only his reply mattered. Dylan waved at her, trying to get her attention. Hello? Am I invisible or something?" "We're looking forward to it," said Dash apologetically. "Thanks." The producer blinked and then stomped off, as if she couldn't wait to be far away from them both. Dash turned toward his brother with a glare. "Am I invisible or something?" he echoed, daggers in his eyes. Dylan frowned. "What was I supposed to say? She completely ignored me." Dash sighed and then shrugged. "I guess everyone's tired of your tricks." "They're not tricks," said Dylan. "They're jokes." "Jokes don't usually end with people losing money. When you steal from people, they tend to dislike you." "I made less money off them than you'd think." Dylan crossed his arms and set his jaw. "But who cares? After today, they won't have to put up with me any longer. I'm so ready to get out of this place." The twins were nearly indistinguishable from each other. Both had the same dark skin, the same crooked dimpled grin, the same bright black eyes, the same short curly hair. They had been on the popular sitcom Dad So Clueless since the age of 5. The show was about a large family whose father was a hapless private investigator. For 7 years, they'd shared the character of the youngest brother, a cutie pie with a lisp whose name was Scooter, but who was often called Scoots Badooter, a sickeningly sweet running gag that the twins eventually grew to despise, especially when people called them the name in real life. Recently, the sitcom's head writer had decided to write Scoots off the show, sending the character to a boarding school in France. Today was the boys' last day of filming. When they'd first received the news, Dash and Dylan were crushed. Dash had been particularly inconsolable, so much so that his parents had threatened to bring him to the emergency room unless he calmed himself down. He didn't tell anyone that he felt guilty for not trying harder to stop Dylan from playing his tricks, his jokes. Maybe there was something he could have done that would have allowed them to continue working. Dylan assured him that something better would come along, but the assurance didn't help. Dash had recently begun to experience moments of extreme anxiety. For the past few weeks, he'd been having vivid nightmares about Dylan. In the nightmares, Dylan was in some sort of danger, and it was Dash's responsibility to save him. Dash would wake in the dark, racing down the hallway between their bedrooms to make sure Dylan was all right. Usually he'd discover Dylan lying in his own bed, snoring softly, completely oblivious to his brother's worry. Then 2 nights ago, Dash had discovered his brother's bed empty, the sheets pulled back in a rumpled mess. Dash ran outside into the night, turning down unfamiliar alleys and deserted back roads until he found himself at a fenced-in, abandoned construction site about 3 miles from home. There, Dash had scrambled around the wide, pockmarked lot, screaming for his brother, expecting to find his broken body beneath a pile of rubble or trapped inside a dumpster. But when his father showed up with the police, they insisted that Dylan was at home, safe and sound. Later, when Dash discovered Dylan lying in bed, his heart turned over with relief. He couldn't believe it. He'd been certain that Dylan had been out there, needing rescue. Afterward, the boys had sat up in Dylan's room late into the night as Dash explained what he'd experienced. Dylan had teased Dash, telling him he needed to pull it together, or their parents were going to send him away to a boarding school in France, never to be seen again. Dash had felt better, ready to fall back asleep, and Dylan offered to let him stay in his room. When Dylan had gotten up to turn off the light, Dash had caught a glimpse of his brother's bare feet. Seconds later, in the new darkness, Dash had been too scared to say he'd seen a flash of Dylan in a strange bed, his soles black and bloody. "Hey," said Dylan from the corner of the sunny room. "Did you read the email we just got?" Dash shook his head. He'd been lost inside a game on his phone ever since the brown-haired woman had come to call them for the production meeting. "Well, pull it up. This sounds like it might be really cool." Dash saw a text from an unknown number as he unlocked his phone and swiped to the email app. The email sender was Larkspur Productions, LLC. The subject read, "Urgent. New project for you." Dash felt his stomach jolt. "Dylan, Dash, what's up? Hope you boys are doing well. We're so glad to hear that the troubles with Dad So Clueless haven't squashed your ambitions. As huge fans of Scooter, we knew we had to reach out to you regarding the amazing project we're putting together. We have a script that we'd love you to check out ASAP. We've read that you're both fans of horror films. Have we got something scary for you? A haunted house, several psychotic villains, and a plot filled with twists you'll never imagine. We believe that you two will be perfect for the lead roles, twin brothers who are the heroes of the story. If you'd like to hear more, please let us know and we'll shoot the script right on over to you. All the best, Del Larkspur, President, Larkspur Productions, LLC. Weird, Dylan said, right? Dash flinched. He hadn't noticed his brother had scrambled across the room to kneel on the floor by his chair. Weird how? Well, I mean, we'd both have to be our own person this time. We've only ever shared a role before. Did you think we'd be doing that for the rest of our lives? No, but, you know, the producers always sort of thought your version of Scooter was better than mine. That's not even close to being true. Dash tried to keep his expression even. He knew his brother was right. He also believed it was one of the reasons Dylan had so often lashed out at the production crew. On this show, we act exactly the same. Always. Dylan rolled his eyes. So, you'd consider saying yes? Dash was quiet for a moment, thinking about his terrible dreams. I'm not sure about being in a horror movie. Just then, both of their phones dinged. Another email had come through. Once again, the sender was Larkspur Productions, LLC. Wide-eyed, the boys stared at each other before opening the message. Dash read it aloud. Don't worry, the script isn't too scary. He glanced up at his brother, and then looked around the room, as if a hidden camera were pointed at them. He scoffed, then said, Are they listening to us? Oh, yeah, totally, Dylan answered. They're just so determined to get us there. Come on, Dash. The guy probably just had an afterthought. Stop being such a wuss. You're a wuss. After a moment, Dash grinned. It does feel good to be wanted again. Dylan slapped his brother's knee. We're going to be movie stars. Okay, then. Who should write back? Asked Dash. You or me? And that is the end of Chapter 4. Thank you so much for watching the video, and I'll talk to you soon.